Hi, my name is Bala Kamallakharan. I'm the founder of Startup Iceland, and I run a small venture studio called Iceland Venture Studios. I've been an early investor in Iceland for about a decade now. I have been investing in startups like Clara, like Greenvolt, like Green Cloud, and Guide to Iceland. And with that, I've also been helping a bunch of founders build companies out of Iceland and taking it all the way. I wanted to bring some of the conversations that I've been having with people in the innovation/startup space to bring that thinking into Iceland, and we're doing that through the series of podcasts and videocasts. And I call it Building the Future, or How to Build the Future, or Conversations about the Challenge of the Future. The name we'll get to soon, but I think a lot about what we need to build and what we have to solve. And startups are the way that I know works best, and we'll start to bring guests and people talking about that. My guest today is Kevin Loss. He's the CEO of AngelList, and he happened to spend some time in Iceland, and I thought it'd be a good place to start this conversation. Kevin, welcome to Iceland.
Thank you very much.
And welcome to the first episode of How to Build the Future.
Yes, looking forward to it.
And maybe what we'll do is start with you can share a little bit about how you came to do what you're doing now, and then we'll jump into the future problem.
Yeah, I started when I was very young as a programmer, and had always been interested, and that was before you could just do it because you had a computer in your home. My parents worked at a college, and so I would use the computers at the college and kind of started figuring that out. And that was just a hobby. It was fun. Then fast forward, that's what I studied in college. That's what I was doing as a profession.
And where was this?
That was in Pennsylvania, Carlisle, Pennsylvania.
Carlisle, Pennsylvania.
Yes,
okay.
Dickinson College was the college where my parents taught. Okay. So as they were professors there, they had access to the computers. They let me go at it. So that was in the early 80s.
And what computer was this? The first memory.
Digital Equipment Corporation, PDP 1170.
There you go.
Well, I remember it was a time-sharing system, and we were literally typing into printers, basically. It was before the screens.
That's
so
right.
It was kind of trying to do games. They were all text-based because that's all you could do on a printer.
Right.
So it was certainly interesting for a kid my age to discover and poke around with that. And then, like I say, fast forward, I got involved in that as a career. So it was programming computers. And now we're in the early 90s, and I came across a technology which everybody would know now called the World Wide Web. It was a browser called Mosaic. And I was like, this is really cool. So I started fixing bugs in that. And I remember I wrote to my company at the time and said, okay, this is the future. And I still have the email. My company wrote back to me and said, we don't see any future in this, quote, web thing. And so it's like, I knew there was a future in this web thing, but I didn't know what to do. I hadn't even heard the term venture capital. It wasn't a broad thing. People didn't just go start startups,
well,
right?
I mean, it's not new. Even Bill Gates think that the internet was not going to be a big thing. Until he changed his mind.
Yeah, and this is, by the way, why I pay close attention to what younger people are doing and thinking. I may not use TikTok, I don't understand it.
Right.
My kids were.
Right.
It was like, okay, that's going to be something. And it was because I knew, and it was obvious to me and everybody I knew, but that's how we would get our information. Whereas you have the older crowd, that's not how they were thinking about what was going on.
No.
So I still remember that today, because we knew it, we saw it, and they didn't see it. And so at the time, my answer was, okay, I got to go back and figure out what to do if I see a thing like that. So that's what took me to business school. So I went back to MIT and got my MBA. Got distracted by consulting for a little while, which I loved, but it wasn't like, given that I was right at that intersection of technology and business. Now venture capital was a thing. Now startups were a thing. And that's where I met a guy named Naval Ravikant. And at the time, we were doing a startup called ePinions, which became shopping.com and then got bought by eBay eventually. And that kind of drew me into the startup world. Cool. And Naval, who's very passionate about everything, especially early stage startup, we worked on a couple early stage startups. We were both working on venture capital at different firms and had invested together on some things. Then that kind of brought us to AngelList as we started working together. It was another project we were doing.
We'll touch upon the early stage part, and I want to kind of draw a smaller circle there. And I think this is kind of goes back to some of my own beliefs in this. You know, I think beginnings are very important, and the starts are very important, because I've always felt like you kind of pave the way for how everything is going to build based on how you start. And I think that's why I wanted to go into the start. So tell me a little bit about AngelList. You know, how, you know, why did you guys think that there was something that you should do? You know, what was the catalyst?
The catalyst for AngelList was actually a blog called Venture Hacks. And it came from another one of the founders of AngelList, Nivi. He was raising money for his company. He networked his way into Naval, and Naval was giving him advice on how to do this. And Nivi was like, "What? This is great advice. How come I can't read it anywhere? Why can't I go to YouTube?" Today you can. Today it's everywhere. At the time, this was not out there. So he asked Naval's permission to write all the advice that he'd been given up. And Nivi's an amazing writer. He tied all together in little tiny bite-sized pieces and started putting it out on the blog. And so Naval got involved. That's when I got involved. There was some writing I did. There were a few other people who were surrounding it at that point. But that was all a give-back project. Nivi was doing his startup. Naval was doing his investing. I was working for another project that Naval and I were working on at the time. And this was just something we were doing to help entrepreneurs. The timing, as with most startups, there's always a timing element to it too. We happened to do this in 2010, coming right off the 2008 crisis, where suddenly with cloud services and the ubiquity of social, meaning viral marketing was a thing, et cetera, meant that suddenly the cost of starting a startup dropped from $5 million to $500,000 to maybe even $50,000. Right, you can make major progress on $50,000. So suddenly there's a proliferation of startups. And so the audience for what we were writing about went from a few people who were looking to raise $5 million to everybody, you know, kids in their dorm room, to everybody around the world. So that timing happened to be just right. And then we started getting emails into us. Hey, thanks for telling me how I should negotiate my terms with my investors, things like that, but I don't have any investors to talk to. And I'll be honest, some of those emails were pretty crazy. You know, I can put my psychic powers into a software and sell it. And it's like, okay, well, maybe that's not what we're thinking. But some of them were, some kid in his dorm room is like, I did this app and I put it on the App Store and I got hundreds of thousands of downloads within the first week. And we're like, okay, we know who you should talk to. So we started introducing them to angel investors that we knew. And that's kind of the genesis of AngelList. It was not an intent to go make this social network for angels and investors. It came and the startups, it came about because of the blog and because of us saying, okay, we have to make this something scalable, because we're not just going to spend all our days making free introductions to everybody. We had day jobs at the time.
So fast forward to now, and what is AngelList now? I mean, what's the status of what you are doing now?
We've gone through a few pivots along the way as we've grown, but right now AngelList is a site that powers angels in writing their checks into startups. It brings a lot more angels behind any check an angel on AngelList writes. So they write a $25,000 check, another $300,000 might come behind them to that first round that a startup does. At this point, there's about $1 billion that's flowed through AngelList into over 5,000 startups. And it's interesting because you go to Wall Street, $1 billion is very small.
That's
now,
right.
of course, it's a very large amount of money, but
That's right.
one deal could involving Facebook could be worth $1 billion. But that's one deal in one company. The exciting part for us is when we get that $1 billion into 5,000 different startups who can then
Right.
all are getting off the ground and trying things, and then some of them become, Uber went through AngelList in 2010, Robinhood, Notion, the collaboration software that just went through. Like these all came through AngelList
Calm,
when they were in their
the
early.
meditation app.
Calm,
Yeah.
the meditation app, absolutely.
Yeah.
These all went through AngelList when they were in their early stages, and that's what gets us so excited is kind of that spread of 5,000 startups out of which the future comes.
Cool. So, the idea of this conversation was about the future. So, what does future look like in AngelList? I know you guys have announced some new things that you're starting up.
Yep.
And so tell me more about that.
So it's kind of focused on growing up with the ecosystem. So we have got this proliferation of startups now that are all doing very exciting things. Some of those exciting things work, then they grow up. Well, guess what? There's a record number of those companies, and they're now hitting the point where they need their next round of financing, the Series A financing. Okay, so how do we help the angels in bringing larger amounts of money to bear to help those companies? There are VCs, they're very good, they can write checks, there just aren't enough of them for the startups that are there. The scale is huge. And so the angels that were very good at what they did, writing the smaller checks, they're growing up and writing larger checks, right?
Yes.
I mean, you yourself are going through this. You have early successes, you're now able to help companies as they grow and write larger checks into them. That's what we're trying to support more broadly in all the ecosystems that we can reach into. And so we've got a set of new products. For example, the latest one we just launched is called Rolling Funds. And what this does is, as a VC, new VC who's raising a fund, it would take somewhere between 18 to 24 months to talk to all your investors, raise the money. They're thinking about it. It's, as they should. I mean, they have to be careful about their investments. Then you close the fund. Then you invest for 2 years, let's say. Then you raise a next fund. And it's kind of this very stepwise process, and it is really hard to get over each step. It takes a lot of effort. It's kind of trying to smooth that out so that as you are raising, it's like, great, you meet one investor, they're interested, they can write their check into your fund right then and there. You can start making small investments. Then another investor invests. Okay, now you can start making larger investments because each investor allows you to write a larger check, et cetera. So that's what the rolling funds concept is. And at the same time, making it feasible while still complying with all the laws to do that without having to hire 7 people to manage your whole back office and accounting, and there's a lot of regulatory you have to deal with the government.
I mean,
and things
this is so relevant and so timely, and as you said, I'm going through this exercise, and just to be on record, I failed the first time to do that.
On raising the fund.
On raising the fund. I tried to do this in 2015 in partnership with an institution, and obviously the institution brought all of that, and then what I brought was the working with the founder part and building the company with the fund. And for whatever reason, that partnership fell apart because the institution decided they were not going to do it anymore. And then I was left at the altar, and I was looking around and saying, okay, what should I do now, right? I'm pretty sure there are plenty of investors, angel investors, who haven't gone through that exercise. They've probably done a couple of deals. They've probably succeeded in some of them. So with this, you're actually opening the world to them and saying, guess what? You can actually get to the next stage and start doing different things. And I think that should be exciting for an ecosystem like Iceland. And I'm pretty sure that other less developed ecosystems would find that quite compelling. Primarily because of 2 reasons. One is, if there is no history of doing venture investing, then it takes a long time for the ecosystem to get comfortable with it. And then, by the way, I can talk with experience because I've been doing this for a decade in Iceland, and I can tell you that we're getting there, but it's a slow process. For Iceland, it's always much faster because we are smaller, we move much faster. probably in other ecosystems, it takes even longer to get to that stage.
Oh, yes.
And when I started on this journey, my view was always, I say the beginnings are important. And I feel I was lucky because my beginning was very important to me, and it kind of paved the way for how I think, how I act, how I behave. And I think that is the part that I want to touch again with you and Naval, because I also think that people make a difference, you know, in how you think, how you act. So how do you think that your thinking has influenced Naval? Because today Naval is he's a celebrity. You know, he has meme Twitter accounts that follow him, and all his wisdom is more or less captured. And by the way, I'm a big fan of Naval, and I know him. I've interacted with him a couple of times, and as I've told you before, I tried to get him to come and start AngelList, or at least start a version of it in Iceland.
Right.
He said, Bala, I really appreciate your persistence, but we're trying to do something a little different.
Right.
We're trying to get the U.S. thing
We're
going.
trying to, make it work anywhere, much less Iceland.
Iceland.
Yeah.
And my argument always was that, you know, actually, if you got it working in Iceland, it's much easier to get through, and you can get it done. But again, that being said, we are here, and Iceland has its own way of working. But I'm pretty excited that you decided to spend some time here. So I'm coming back to the question.
Yeah.
You started working with Naval.
Yes.
So how do you think you've influenced his thought?
Yeah.
And how do you think he's influenced your thought in terms of what you do?
Yeah. No, it's it is. Naval has a very specific skill, which I really deeply appreciate, is we will have a 2-hour-long conversation about kind of the future of the world and what's happening, or the best way to approach this, or whatever. Really fun, really deep, the kind you do in college late at night, and I love it. But then he does this thing where he manages to summarize everything you said into those 140 characters that fits in a tweet. And it's like, you see that, it's like, okay, not only is that encapsulate everything we said, but it's exactly right. It doesn't leave anything out. It doesn't confuse things. And so he has that capability of making it instantly accessible to everybody else. Yeah. And what he's pointed that skill at is this ability to spark things. Like, as he refers to it, if anything, and startups are especially like this, requires everybody to jump. You have a chicken and egg problem. He can solve the chicken and egg problem. He can get everybody to jump at the same time, because everybody gets what's happening, and because they understand it, they believe the other people will jump, and kind of everybody jumps together. When everybody jumps together, it works. It actually works, yeah. And that's his key skill. What I have always brought to the table in our discussions is kind of the when we're discussing topics, I kind of bring the deeper thought to how would that actually work. So I'm the one who has the hour-long conversation that he can then summarize. And then the second, because that's what I do, I usually end up managing a lot of the pieces, because he likes to do that thinking, the vision. Part. And then, okay, so now that we have 7 people very excited to do this, what do they do tomorrow, right? So that's where I'm like, okay, so you do this, we'll tie the pieces together and kind of build the thing.
Very cool. And then I remember Brad Barnum from Union Square Ventures. He was here for Startup Iceland, I think, a couple of years back. And I asked him, so what is one thing that you would like to see in founders? Right. And he said clarity. He said clarity, because obviously when you have a vision, you're thinking and juggling with many things, and you have this broad idea of kind of, you know, what you want to do, right? But nobody else has that context. So they can't tie all those pieces together, and it's up to the founder to kind of crystallize their message to something that is clear. Everybody understands, hey, I'm going after this is what I'm going to build. And then that becomes a lot more, as you said, get people excited. They say, oh wow, okay, we can back that, we can actually support you with that. But if you're vague about it, people basically say, I don't know what this is, how am I supposed to help you?
100%. Like, this is kind of a key skill that people misunderstand, is startups are composed of very smart people. But that doesn't mean the organization is smart,
Right.
right? It needs to be simpler so that everybody knows what to do.
Right.
And it's interesting. It's another one of Naval's quotes. I don't know if he's ever tweeted this, but is that one of the things that makes Silicon Valley so powerful is it's one of the few places in the world where the genetic engineering PhD sweeps the floors, because that's what's necessary, and it's because they're tied into, well, that's what's in the way to go do this next thing. Great, I have to build my own desk because we can save money that way, because then we can put it into the equipment we need to do the genetic engineering to get us to the next phase.
I mean, this is also something that I've learned watching founders do. You know, again, this was a new world for me in 2009, 2010. I used to work for one of the Icelandic banks. You know, I'd never known a startup before that, other than I know that they existed. I knew these entrepreneurs existed. But once I got involved investing in a startup, I realized that, you know, somebody has to sweep the floor. Somebody has to make the table. Somebody has to get this thing moving. And there is no department. There is no team, there is no support, administrative staff. It's you. It's three people who basically
came. The friction of trying to manage 10 people to do that, that's like it would waste all your time. No, you want to focus.
So I've kind of narrowed this down to innovation is a lot about tinkering, and also tinkering the right things. And you know, kind of getting to that next point where you figure something out that gives you the gateway to understand the next problem to go after. And progressively building something leads to something bigger. And I think I want to kind of maybe unpack that a little bit in the context of innovation. I mean, so maybe let's take an example of some investments that you have done as an investor from the outside, because I think that's what most people see from the outside.
Right.
And can you give some example that you've seen where something like that, where, you know, three people came and were not very clear, they were somehow able to crystallize it, they were able to push it forward a little bit further, and then it just blew up?
So there's many along those lines, because that's kind of what a startup is. And it's part of what makes the early stage startups investing so difficult, because whatever you've invested in is probably not what they're going to end up doing. It's not what worked in the end. So even, I mean, let's take one of the bigger ones that flowed through the platform that we had a part in, even Uber. Right? At the time they raised, they were about dispatching limousines via SMS, right? Which is not like that would be known in the US as Uber Black now. It's the kind of the upper end service, but that's not where their disruption or money came from.
So there was no app, there was none of that?
No, so that app came later, although it was pretty fast on. They were developing the app at the time. But the other thing that came later was the idea that anybody could just bring their car and suddenly give everybody a ride. And that was the disruptive thing. It wasn't even really their idea. There was a company called Sidecar, and then Lyft did it both before then. But then Uber jumped into it with both feet. Like, that's the thing, the good startup teams pivot fast, right? That's why you hear early stage investors always talk about focusing on the team. The team will figure out the right idea. It's not the idea that then is so good that it just sucks the team along, right? So the team is the one that pivots. And so then once they went into that, they're like, okay, we're gonna go all in on that and make it work better than anybody else has made it work before. And so that's exactly what they did. Even today, so I'm going to stick with the ride sharing, because it's something that I got personally involved in when I wrote a check into Cabify, which is kind of Uber for Spain. So, but I've watched what they've done through the crisis, and suddenly they're not a people delivery company. Nobody can get rides in a car during the pandemic. They're suddenly a delivery company. So they pull up in the car, they pop the trunk, somebody drops something in the trunk, they drive to where it's supposed to go, somebody picks it out of the trunk, no human contact, suddenly they're delivering food and packages and everything that people need to get from place to place. And it's just that kind of creativity of meeting the moment that is what you're looking for. And when that happens in a startup, then you hit on something, and that's new. And suddenly it kind of
just takes
grows
off from
like
there.
crazy.
Yeah. I mean, bringing the context to Iceland, I mean, you've been here for a few weeks, and you've met a bunch of people, you've met with the ecosystem. What are the things that you think are working? What are the things that you think we need to work on, and go from there?
So there's a couple things, and these are, I'll call it, they are service impressions. I don't want to imply that I know everything about the Iceland ecosystem at this point. But I'm watching this really interesting thing with Iceland being a small, well-run country that is both an advantage and a disadvantage.
Right.
And so it is fascinating to me watching that, where if a company does something good in Iceland, there usually isn't room in the Iceland market for 2 or 3 companies doing the same thing. And so they kind of have this mini monopoly. They don't have competition. They are the thing that does whatever they do. And then they start to serve other needs that the customers have in Iceland. And so they end up with kind of the thing in Iceland that spreads out and does a pretty good business there. That is really hard to translate to another country when they say, great, let's take on a larger market. Let's go to Germany. Let's go to Denmark. Suddenly, it's like, okay, now I've got this set of things where I'm not best at any one thing and I'm not used to competition. You know, how do I translate that somewhere else? It doesn't. And so it becomes both a good way to get started as a test market and an impediment because you haven't built up a company around competition and go-to-market and things like that. And then you see some of the companies that have succeeded in that, and they're doing something very different because they're focusing on the one thing and trying to be best at that and going head-to-head against everybody else in the world.
Right.
Now, for me, there's a really interesting opportunity to marry those two, because there are things that you can do here that you could not do elsewhere because of the size and being able to work with the government and things like that to test something out that in a larger market you could not do. You know, we can't start a new bank in the U.S. It's just the regulators are too concerned that you're going to do something to 350 million
they
people.
They put a stop on Facebook.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. So Facebook kind of comes and says, we're going to do this whole new financial system. And the U.S. government's like, no, wait.
No, you can't.
We don't know what the implications of that are. Slow down. But if you can work with somebody and figure out the implications and grow it up, but then very quickly and maintaining focus, okay, now let's try that somewhere else. And there are areas on that ranging from anything I would think is heavily regulated, healthcare, fintech, financial transactions, things like that, where it's great. By working with people here, you can figure that out and then grow it quickly, showing that it has worked along the way and we've worked out the kinks of how it could potentially affect things. So it creates an opportunity as well, but it's something I think that the local market needs to keep in mind very much, is don't get trapped as being the largest in Iceland at something. Right,
exactly. I think this is very good advice. And with that, I think we'll wrap up this conversation. Thanks for taking the time, and thanks for being the first guest in our first podcast and first video cast.
Yes, it's been very exciting to be here and see this, because I love kind of the creativity and enthusiasm and entrepreneurial spirit. It suits itself well to innovation here.
Right, and I can tell you that it never gets old for me. I've been doing it for a decade, sitting here in Reykjavik, and once again, I feel like it's day one of starting this journey. So thanks again for doing it.
Awesome.
All right. Thanks everybody, and hopefully we'll start doing more of these episodes, more conversations, and thank you.
Perfect. Thank you.